5:47 a.m. Miami Beach, Florida. July 19, 2026. Three rigid hull inflatables cross the canal in formation. No running lights. Engines throttled low. The water between the marina slip and the seawall gate was 41 meters wide. They covered it in under 90 seconds. On the north bank, a glass and marble compound worth $14 million. Palm trees lining a private cul-de-sac. Three matte black sports cars in the motor court. Inside the main building, two men were still wearing wireless microphone packs from a live workout stream that had gone out to 4.2 million followers 40 minutes earlier. 12 women were somewhere behind a mirrored wall in the sealed guest wing. The hostage rescue team had been staged in that marina slip for 41 hours. The moment they had been waiting for had arrived. What cracked this case open was not a wiretap, not a confidential informant, not a financial audit. It was a license plate, visible for 6 seconds. In the background of a podcast episode that had already been watched 900,000 times, and nobody had noticed until one analyst in Arlington looked at the wrong frame on a Tuesday afternoon. That single plate number, matched against a missing persons report out of Tallahassee, set in motion one of the most complex fugitive apprehension operations the U.S. Marshals Service had executed on American soil in the past decade. 41 hours of staged silence. A joint task force spanning 4 federal agencies, and a mirrored wall that opened at 5:52 a.m. to reveal what had been hidden behind it for 88 days. This is how it unraveled. From the beginning, the property sat at the end of a private cul-de-sac on the Miami Beach waterfront, a stretch of canal front real estate where the houses had their own docking slips and the neighbors kept their distance by design. The compound had been purchased in the name of a Delaware holding company in late 2024. On the surface, it was a content studio and private residence. The two men who lived and worked there, brothers, referred to in federal charging documents as Suspect 1 and Suspect 2, had built a media brand over roughly 4 years, centered on physical discipline, financial independence, and what they publicly described as rejecting conventional weakness. Their combined follower count across platforms had passed 4 million by early 2026. They streamed twice a week from a custom-built gym and podcast studio on the ground floor of the compound. They drove expensive cars. They dressed expensively. They spoke in a register that their audience found compelling, direct, aggressive, aspirational. Federal agents would later describe the public persona as methodically constructed. Every element served a function. The cars were chosen for their visual impact in thumbnail images. The studio lighting was calibrated to project authority. The language used in every video, the cadence, the vocabulary, the specific emotional frequencies it targeted, had been refined across 4 years of audience testing. This was not a pair of men who stumbled into an audience. This was a pair of men who engineered one, deliberately and patiently, for purposes that had nothing to do with fitness or financial philosophy. The guest wing was a different matter entirely. It occupied the eastern side of the property's second floor, roughly 2,000 square feet sealed off from the main living area by a floor-to-ceiling mirrored sliding panel. From the main hallway, it looked like a wall. From the outside, the windows of that wing had been fitted with interior blackout film that blocked any view from the canal. The wing had its own climate control, its own bathroom facilities, its own door locks that required a keypad code to open from the inside. It did not appear on the property's original architectural drawings. The modification had been made after purchase, permitted under a renovation filing that described the work as a home theater installation. The contractor who performed the work, a small construction company based in Opelika, was paid in 2 wire transfers from one of the 3 Delaware entities named in the federal indictment. Investigators interviewed the contractor's crew in the days following the raid. None of them reported being told what the space would be used for. The crew chief told investigators he was asked to build a room that felt, in his words, like a hotel. Climate-controlled, private, clean. He thought it was a luxury upgrade for paying guests. 12 women, ranging in age from 22 to 28, had been inside that wing. They had been told, when they arrived, that they were participating in a paid brand ambassador program, a residential retreat, 12 to 16 weeks, full room and board, a stipend, content creation work for the brothers' media channels. Several had responded to social media recruitment posts. Several others had been approached through talent management contacts that investigators would later trace back to a network of intermediary accounts. The posts themselves were sophisticated. They did not read like amateur trafficking lures. They read like legitimate influencer contracts. They offered specific figures: a weekly stipend of $1,500, travel covered, accommodations provided, a portfolio of content the women could use for their own channels after the program ended. The accounts that ran the posts had professional profile aesthetics, follower counts in the low thousands, a history of posting about the talent and influencer industry. They had been cultivated over months to look credible. They were designed to survive a quick search by a 23-year-old trying to verify whether an opportunity was real. The first woman was reported missing in October of 2025. Her name, in federal documents, is listed only as Victim 1. She was 24 years old. She had been working as a licensed practical nurse at a clinic in Tallahassee, Florida. She had been saving for a certification exam that would move her to a higher pay grade. She had a studio apartment, a cat she left with a neighbor, and a niece she saw most weekends. Her mother described her, in the missing persons intake interview, as cautious, careful, not the type to disappear without calling. Her car was found at a shopping plaza parking lot 8 days after she stopped showing up for shifts. Her mother had called the Tallahassee Police Department 4 times in the first week. The missing persons report was filed on October 9, 2025. One detail in that report would matter later: the rental van she had been seen getting into. The plate. The reporting officer noted the partial plate from a parking lot security camera, 3 characters, the last 3 of a Florida rental tag. The camera was a low-resolution unit mounted above a pharmacy entrance, angled to cover the store's front approach rather than the lot itself. The van appeared at the edge of its frame for 11 seconds. The plate was partially obscured by a shopping cart corral in the foreground. 3 characters, barely legible after enhancement. The reporting officer ran what was recoverable, got no immediate hit, and entered the partial into the National Crime Information Center database on October 11th. It generated no immediate hits. No agency flagged it. The case was listed as open, low priority, adult voluntary departure not excluded. That report sat in the NSIC system for 8 months. 11 more women would go missing over the following months. The youngest was 22, a freelance graphic designer from Orlando, who had been building a client base and saw the opportunity as a way to fund 6 months of focused work on her own portfolio. The oldest was 28, a paralegal from Savannah, Georgia, who had recently left a firm she described to friends as toxic and was looking for something that would let her step back from a legal environment while she figured out what came next. A 25-year-old fitness instructor from Jacksonville, a 23-year-old nursing student from Gainesville who was between clinical rotations, a 26-year-old copywriter from Atlanta who had been freelancing remotely and thought a structured residential program sounded like a way to get off her couch and into something with momentum. They came from different states, different backgrounds, different circumstances. None of them knew each other before they arrived at the compound. Each of them had been approached through what appeared to be a legitimate opportunity. Each of them had told someone, a parent, a roommate, a coworker, that they were going away for a brand ambassador program. Each of those conversations had the ordinary texture of someone leaving for a job. Excitement, maybe some nervousness. A forwarded contact number that, when anyone tried it later, went to a voicemail box that was never checked. None of those contacts knew where, exactly. That had been part of the design. The recruitment materials described the location only as a private residential facility in South Florida. Non-disclosure language in the program agreement, which each woman had signed digitally through a document platform that investigators later confirmed was operating under a false business registration, prohibited sharing the address during the program period for what was described as client privacy and content exclusivity reasons. By December of 2025, the U.S. Marshals Service Fugitive Apprehension Task Force in the Eastern District of Florida had no idea the compound existed. The brothers were not, at that point, fugitives. They were not persons of interest. They were, as far as federal databases were concerned, content creators with no outstanding warrants. That changed because of a Tuesday afternoon and a freeze frame. Special analyst Rachel Voss worked out of the Marshals Fugitive Tracking Unit in Arlington, Virginia. Her official designation was Digital Exploitation and Intelligence Analyst, a position that sounds administrative until you understand what it actually involves. Reviewing open source media, social posts, live streams, uploaded videos, for background details that might help locate wanted persons or develop location intelligence on fugitive networks. She had done the work long enough that she had developed what colleagues called a background discipline, the habit of watching the edges of every frame rather than its center, because fugitives and fugitive networks did not advertise themselves in the foreground. She had been assigned to a separate matter entirely. A money laundering fugitive whose last known location was the greater Miami metropolitan area. In reviewing recent Miami area social media content for background location data, she ran a keyword and geotag pull on high follower accounts operating in Miami Beach. The brothers' channel came up in the results. She started with the most recent uploads and worked backward. On July 3, 2026, the brothers had posted a podcast episode, 94 minutes of conversation recorded in their studio. The episode had been viewed over 900,000 times. In the comments, 7,300 posts. Nobody had noted anything unusual. Voss ran the video through a background frame extraction tool that the Marshals unit used to pull still images from video at 1 frame per second intervals for location analysis. She was looking for street signs, landmark indicators, any geography that might help her primary assignment. At the 1 hour, 14 minute and 17 second mark, a segment of the podcast had been filmed from a slightly wider angle than the rest. The camera had captured a partial view through a gap in a side door, a door that led to what appeared to be the motor court. And in that motor court, visible for 6 seconds of footage, was a white rental van. The van's rear plate was partially obscured by a palm tree. Voss ran an enhancement protocol on the frame sequence. The tool she used applied a multi-frame averaging process, stacking the 6 seconds of imagery to reduce compression artifacts and sharpen edge definition on the plate characters. She recovered 7 of the plate's 8 characters. She ran the partial against Florida rental vehicle registrations for the relevant registration window. It returned 4 candidate plates. She ran all 4 against the NCZIC database. 1 came back with a match. Not to her fugitive. To a vehicle flagged in connection with a missing persons report. Tallahassee, Florida. Filed October 11, 2025. Victim 1. I spent time going through the case file on how this match was made, and one thing kept standing out. The van in that video had been sitting in that motor court since at least early October. It was a rental. Someone had kept it there, on a property in Miami Beach, for months. That is not how rental vehicles work. The rental company associated with the registration had reported the vehicle overdue in late November of 2025 and had filed a stolen vehicle report with Broward County Sheriff's Office at that time. The stolen vehicle report and the missing persons report were in 2 different databases, filed by 2 different agencies in 2 different jurisdictions, and no automated process had ever put them in the same room. Voss flagged the match to her supervisor at 2:43 p.m. on July 8th. By 3:15, the flag had been escalated to the Marshals Southern District of Florida Fugitive Operations Group. By 5 p.m., a supervisory deputy had pulled the full missing persons file and cross-referenced it against 11 other open missing persons cases that had been filed in the Missing 6 system between October 2025 and April 2026. The cross-reference turned up a pattern that had not previously been visible because the cases had been filed across 4 different jurisdictions: Tallahassee, Orlando, Savannah, Jacksonville, Gainesville, and 3 cities outside Florida, and no single agency had held all of them at once. 8 of the 12 open cases referenced, in their intake notes, a brand ambassador or content creation program as the last known destination of the missing person. 3 of the 8 included partial contact information for talent management accounts that, when run through federal business registration databases, traced back to the same Delaware holding company that owned the Miami Beach compound. The pattern was not definitive proof, but it was enough. What strikes us about this moment in the case is how close it came to never being seen at all. 8 missing persons reports, filed in 8 different jurisdictions, sitting in a federal database that any authorized law enforcement terminal could query, and the connection only emerged because an analyst working a completely different case ran a background frame from a podcast video and happened to get lucky with a plate. 7 women's cases had already been in that system for months. Nobody had pulled them together. That is a systemic failure that deserves direct attention. The Marshals Southern District Fugitive Operations Group opened a formal investigation on July 9th. They did not immediately approach the brothers. They did not flag the compound to local law enforcement. The decision, made at supervisory level, was to establish surveillance and build the evidentiary foundation before any visible federal presence could alert the subjects. This was not a simple calculation. Every day of surveillance was a day the women inside the compound remained where they were. The supervisory deputy who signed off on the 41-hour staging window later told investigators it was the hardest operational decision of his career. The calculus rested on a specific concern. If the brothers received any indication of law enforcement interest, a neighbor's offhand comment, an unusual vehicle parked on the cul-de-sac, a platform notification about account review, there was a credible operational risk that the women inside would be moved before an entry team could reach them. Moved to an unknown location. The van that had never been recovered was part of that calculation. There was at least one vehicle in the network capable of a rapid transit. The entry had to be clean, coordinated, and total. The 41 hours were not passive. Every hour of the staging window was an active intelligence operation. Surveillance teams maintained continuous observation. Electronic monitoring was in place. A federal attorney was on call around the clock to respond to any warrant needs that developed overnight. The Joint Operations Cell in Doral ran shift briefings every 6 hours. Nothing about the wait was comfortable. It was simply the least dangerous option available. Here is the part that does not make sense on the surface. The brothers continued to stream during the entire surveillance window. On July 10th, 2 days after the license plate match, they posted a 40-minute fitness video filmed inside the same studio. On July 14th, a live Q&A that ran for over an hour. On July 17th, a morning workout streamed to roughly 200,000 concurrent viewers. They had no idea, or they believed they were untouchable. The case file doesn't resolve which. Surveillance teams established observation posts on both the canal-facing and street-facing sides of the property by July 10th. An HSI, Homeland Security Investigations, electronic surveillance unit, obtained a federal warrant for thermal imaging of the compound's eastern wing on July 11th. The imaging confirmed heat signatures consistent with multiple occupants in the sealed guest wing. Consistent with 12? The exact count was not confirmed until the door opened. The FBI's hostage rescue team was formally activated on July 12th. A joint operations cell was established at a secure facility in Doral, drawing personnel from HSI, FBI, the Marshals Service, and Miami-Dade SWAT. The operational plan went through 7 revisions over 6 days. Here is an obstacle that does not appear in the public record. On July 15th, the electronic surveillance unit's primary monitoring equipment suffered a partial failure due to interference from a commercial router system that the brothers had installed on the property for their streaming setup. For approximately 19 hours, thermal imaging of the guest wing was unavailable. The surveillance team was operating with the knowledge that 12 women were somewhere in a compound they could no longer fully see into. The technical team resolved the interference by repositioning the receiving array on the morning of July 16th. Coverage was restored. The heat signatures remained consistent. No one had been moved. On July 16th and 17th, while operational planning continued, federal investigators working the financial thread of the case executed subpoenas against 3 banking institutions associated with the Delaware Holding Company and its subsidiary entities. What came back from those subpoenas in the compressed 2-day window before the raid gave investigators a clearer picture of the operation's financial architecture than they had expected to assemble so quickly. Monthly wire transfers from an offshore account registered in the Cayman Islands. Payments to the Nevada talent management firm totaling over $200,000 across 8 months. Payroll records for a small number of individuals, described in the charging documents as coordinators, whose names and contact details investigators immediately ran against federal watch lists. 2 of those names returned no domestic records. They were the intermediaries. They were already gone. The operational timeline was set for the morning of July 19th. The brothers' public streaming schedule showed a morning workout planned for that day. They had announced it 2 days earlier to their followers. The Joint Operations Cell determined that the live stream format worked in their favor. The brothers would be stationary, mic'd, and positioned in the ground floor studio. Camera crew, if any, would be logged into the entry plan. At 6 p.m. on July 18th, 3 Marshals rigid hull inflatables were staged in the marina slip across the canal. The vessels were positioned behind a private yacht that had been quietly secured by federal agents under a forfeiture warrant obtained the previous week, a warrant that had nothing to do with this case and would not be publicly connected to it until months later. The marina slip gave the inflatables a direct line across the canal to the compound's seawall gate. 41 hours of staging. The teams rotated in 6-hour shifts. Nobody moved on the canal side. The deputies and agents cycling through those shifts maintained noise and light discipline throughout. No visible activity, no radio traffic above a whisper threshold, no movement on the dock that would read as unusual to anyone watching from the compound's upper windows. The water between the slip and the seawall reflected the ambient glow of Miami Beach in the small hours, amber and salt white, everything still. On the morning of July 19th, the brothers began their scheduled workout stream at approximately 5 a.m. The stream was being watched in real time from the Joint Operations Cell in Doral. At 5:31, Suspect 1 made a comment to the camera about the sunrise. He was visible through the studio's east-facing window. Both men were positioned exactly where the entry plan predicted they would be. At 5:47 a.m., the 3 inflatables left the marina slip. They crossed the canal in formation. No running lights. Engines throttled to minimum. 41 meters of open water. The lead vessel's bowman secured a line to the seawall gate's lower rail at 5:49. The gate was a steel frame with a keypad lock on the exterior. The entry plan had accounted for this. A Marshals breaching specialist cut the lock's external wiring in 11 seconds. The gate opened at 5:50 a.m. The HRT entry team moved through the gate in a stack formation and spread across the pool deck. A second team entered from the street side simultaneously, Miami-Dade SWAT executing a parallel breach through the compound's main vehicle gate in the cul-de-sac. The 2 teams had rehearsed the coordination 12 times in the Doral facility over the preceding 4 days. They had drilled on a mock-up floor plan drawn from the compound's original architectural filings, adjusted to account for the modifications confirmed by the renovation permit and the thermal imaging data. Every door position, every interior angle, Every potential position of every person inside had been walked through so many times that the team leaders could run the sequence without verbal commands. The ground floor was secured in under 90 seconds. The brothers were taken prone on the marble kitchen floor at 5:51 a.m. Both were still wearing their wireless microphone packs. The live stream was still running. Approximately 14,000 viewers were watching at the moment of entry. The stream cut to a black screen at 5:51 and 40 seconds, when the router was physically disconnected by a Marshals technician. There's a line in the HRT entry team's after-action report that reads, "Subjects were compliant upon visual contact with entry team. No resistance." Subject 1 stated, "We knew something was coming." Subject 2 did not speak. The hostage rescue team moved to the second floor at 5:51 a.m. The mirrored sliding panel at the end of the main hallway was the last structural obstacle. The keypad code was unknown. The panel was a custom fabrication, steel-framed, mirror-faced, and it was mounted on a recessed track. The entry plan had flagged it as a potential breach point 6 days earlier when HSI's electronic unit confirmed the space behind it. A Marshals breaching specialist bypassed the panel's motor drive, the mechanism that moved it along the track, and manually disengaged the lock plate. The panel required 2 members of the breach team working in tandem to pry from the recessed mounting. The track had been installed with heavy-duty stops that resisted manual force, requiring a specific sequence of pressure points to disengage. The full breach of the panel took 40 seconds. In the after-action report, the team leader noted that those 40 seconds were the longest of the operation. They did not know what they would find on the other side. They did not know the condition of the women inside. They had heat signatures and an 8-month-old missing persons report and 12 reasons to move as fast as the steel and track would allow. The panel was pried open at 5:52 a.m. The room behind it was lit by overhead fluorescents. It had been divided into individual sleeping areas by portable privacy screens. There were personal items, bags, clothing, toiletry kits. There was a common area with chairs and a table. There were books. There was a small flat-screen television mounted to one wall, tuned to a streaming service. It was clean. It had the quality of a space that had been lived in for an extended period by people who had not been given a reason to make it otherwise, or who had made it otherwise because maintaining order was how you kept a sense of yourself when everything else was outside your control. 12 women were in that room. The youngest was 22. The oldest was 28. They had been inside the compound for between 11 and 88 days. The woman who had been there the longest was Victim 1, the nurse from Tallahassee whose partial plate number had started everything. Federal documents describe the moment of entry into the guest wing in clinical language. What the HRT team's own communications describe is different. One deputy, speaking to a journalist months later on background, said, "They didn't scream. They didn't panic. They just looked at us." And the one who had been there the longest, she asked if we were really there. Like she was checking. He paused in the interview at that point and said nothing further about it. All 12 were ambulatory. All 12 received immediate medical evaluation on the pool deck from the paramedic team staged with the entry unit. The evaluation was conducted by 2 paramedics and a federal physician who had been brought onto the task force specifically for this operation, a specialist in trauma and acute stress presentation whose role was to assess the women's immediate medical needs and determine transport priority within minutes of extraction. 8 were transported to Jackson Memorial Hospital by 6:15 a.m. for further assessment. 4 were evaluated on scene and transported by federal vehicle. None required emergency surgical intervention. All 12 were medically stable. Before any of them left the compound, a victim advocate from the U.S. Attorney's Office Southern District was on the pool deck. Her job was not investigative. Her job was to be the first person who asked each woman what she needed, without any agenda attached to the answer. She had been briefed on all 12 cases. She knew each woman's name before they walked out, She used their names. Each woman carried, when she walked out through the pool deck, a black gym bag with the compound's initials monogrammed on the zipper pull. The bags had been provided to them on arrival. They had not been given anything else to put their belongings in. The image that the Marshals Public Affairs team would release, the only image, showed a line of women crossing the pool deck at 6:04 a.m., wrapped in gray and gold Marshals Service emergency blankets, each carrying a black monogrammed bag. No faces were visible. No names were released. The Marshals patch on the blankets was the only identifier in the frame. The sealed guest wing was documented and photographed by an FBI evidence team for the next 11 hours. Every personal item was cataloged. Every surface was processed. The team recovered electronics, tablets, a shared desktop terminal, whose contents would form part of the evidentiary foundation of the federal case. They recovered the signed program agreements, printed and filed in a cabinet near the entrance to the wing. They recovered communications logs. They recovered a ledger, handwritten, that tracked each woman's arrival date, the recruitment account that had contacted her, and a code that investigators determined corresponded to the talent management intermediary who had coordinated the approach. The brothers were transported to the Federal Detention Center in Miami at 6:22 a.m. Federal charges were filed before noon. The indictment, sealed until arraignment, listed charges across multiple counts spanning a conspiracy dating to October 2025. A legal attaché from the British Embassy in Washington contacted the U.S. Department of Justice at 2:14 p.m. the same day. UK authorities filed formal extradition paperwork by 4 p.m. Both men entered not guilty pleas at their initial appearance. In the days immediately following the arraignment, federal prosecutors and victim advocates began the process of formal interviews with each of the 12 women. These interviews, conducted at the women's discretion and pace, generated testimony that would anchor the government's case. The accounts were consistent in their broad architecture: the recruitment contact, the signed agreement, the arrival at the compound, the point at which the reality of the situation became clear, and the subsequent period of confinement under conditions designed to feel, on the surface, almost normal. Almost. The television, the books, the climate control, the meals, brought in by someone who unlocked the panel from the outside, set them on the table in the common area, and locked the panel again. The illusion of a residential program maintained long enough to prevent the kind of visible distress that might have been detectable from outside. Several of the women described having been told, repeatedly, that the program was nearly complete, that the content work would begin soon, that the stipend would be processed at the end of the program period. The language of legitimacy, sustained past the point where any of them still believed it, because the alternative to believing it was something the enclosed space and the locked keypad did not leave room for. Victim 1 had stopped counting the days after the first month. She had started counting them again, she told investigators, when she noticed a change in the activity pattern outside the windows around mid-July. She didn't know what the change meant. She just knew something was different. She had been in the wing for 88 days when the panel came open. Would you say the system worked here? Or did it take a lucky freeze frame to accomplish what 8 open missing persons reports should have triggered months earlier? That's not a rhetorical question. It's the thing this case actually asks. Here's the take that will probably draw disagreement. The investigative system in this case did not work. One analyst, on assignment for a completely different matter, noticed one background detail that should have been flagged by automatic cross-referencing tools the moment the second missing persons report referenced a brand ambassador program. Instead, 8 women's cases sat in a federal database for months without a connection being drawn. Analyst Voss did her job exceptionally well. The system she was working within failed the women in that wing at every point before she got lucky. Put yourself in the position of the Tallahassee detective who took victim 1's mother's 4th phone call in October 2025. You have a partial plate. You have a missing adult. You file the report. You follow the protocol. and the protocol does not connect what you filed to 7 similar cases filed in other jurisdictions over the following 6 months. What would you have done differently? The honest answer is probably nothing. Because the connection required access to all 8 files simultaneously, and no single investigator had that. The federal indictment described a structured operation that had been in planning since mid-2025. The Delaware holding company that owned the compound was one of 3 entities identified in the charging documents. A talent management firm, registered in Nevada, operating through a suite of social media accounts, was identified as the primary recruitment mechanism. A third entity, a logistics company with a fleet of rental vehicles maintained on a long-term basis, handled transportation. The rental van in the motor court, the one that had been sitting on the property since October, was registered to that third entity. Federal agents seized 3 additional vehicles associated with the logistics company from locations in Broward County and Palm Beach County on the morning of the raid. A 4th vehicle, described in the charging documents as a transit van, was not located. Its last registered position in a GPS system was from late June, outside a storage facility in Hialeah. The facility was searched. The van was not there. It has not been recovered. The talent management firm's social media accounts were deactivated by the platforms within hours of the arrest. Federal investigators identified at least 17 active recruitment posts that had been running across multiple platforms in the 60 days before the raid. It is not known how many additional individuals may have responded to those posts. The indictment references a contact list recovered from a server inside the compound. The number of entries on that list has not been publicly disclosed. 2 individuals identified in the charging documents as intermediaries, the people who managed the talent management accounts and coordinated initial contact with recruited women, have not been taken into custody as of the date of this account. Both are believed to be outside the continental United States. UK extradition proceedings for the brothers are ongoing. The timeline for those proceedings is not publicly available. Here is something about this case that stays with you, even after the operational details fade. The compound had a public-facing identity that was, by most measurable standards, successful. 4.2 million followers. Brand partnerships. A merchandise line. A podcast with a 9-figure cumulative view count. The platform infrastructure that enabled that visibility also made the recruitment possible. The same posts that reached paying audiences also reached 22-year-old women looking for a legitimate opportunity. There was no visible line between one and the other until the mirrored wall came open at 5:52 a.m. on July 19th. The platforms that hosted the recruitment content were aware of the accounts before the raid. Not because they had flagged them for suspicious activity, but because the talent management firm's Nevada registration had triggered a routine review flag on one platform's advertiser compliance system in March of 2026. That review had been deprioritized in a backlog queue. It was still sitting in that queue on the morning of July 19th. Victim 1 was discharged from Jackson Memorial Hospital 6 days after the raid. Her mother, who had driven from Tallahassee to Miami the morning of July 19th, before she had officially been told her daughter had been found, because someone at the marshal's office had made an informal call, was waiting in the lobby when she came out. The partial plate. October 9th, 2025. 8 months and 10 days earlier. The network, as charged, has been dismantled. The compound is under federal asset forfeiture proceedings. The brothers are in federal custody awaiting trial. 2 intermediaries remain at large. 1 vehicle is unaccounted for. A contact list recovered from a server inside the compound contains an unknown number of entries, and investigators have not publicly stated whether any of those entries represent additional victims or additional targets. A database that holds 8 open missing persons reports, all referencing the same recruitment pattern, generated no automated connection across 8 months. The analyst who made the connection was working a different case entirely. The women walked out through the pool deck. The compound is sealed. The question that no court proceeding will fully answer is how many other properties, operating under different names, different holding companies, and different social media accounts, are still running. We read every one. The system that created the demand for this operation has not been dismantled. The arrest closed one case. It did not change the underlying conditions. The mirrored wall is gone now. What was behind it is a matter of federal record. What remains and where is still being